Welcome to the program. Those stories shortly, but first, the latest boatload of asylum seekers has just arrived at Christmas Island, but the Gillard Government's plan to have them processed offshore isn't quite signed and ready. Malaysia's agreed to a deal and Papua New Guinea may follow, but the political debate over whether the government's making policy on the run is intensifying. Heather Hewitt reports.
The number of asylum seekers to reach Australia by boat has actually declined compared to this time last year. Not that you'd know it from the political debate raging here.
There is certainly an enduring characteristic in our Australian sort of political psyche that boat arrivals are a big issue. But I think to some outsiders, the numbers seem really quite small compared with some of the dimensions that other countries are dealing with.
Places like Greece have a waiting list just of people to be processed of over 50,000. We know that in places like Italy, just in the last few weeks, we've had 25,000 people come into Italy seeking refuge. The numbers in Australia are far, far less.
The Labor government doesn't seem able to explain the facts of that, and the Liberal Party and Tony Abbott and others exploit it most cynically for political advantage.
There are 6,500 asylum seekers in detention centres in Australia at the moment, but the latest arrivals, a boatload of 32 men intercepted just off Broome at the weekend, and now another boat intercepted off Christmas Island today, won't be staying. They'll be detained in separate accommodation on Christmas Island before becoming the first under Labor to be processed overseas. What's not clear yet is where that will be, though Papua New Guinea is looking the most likely. The government's recent deal with Malaysia to transfer the next 800 asylum seekers there in exchange for 4,000 declared refugees isn't signed yet. So the status of the latest arrivals here is uncertain for now.
I presume the boat left before we had declared our policy, and it arrived after we declared our policy, so what that leaves them legally I wouldn't really like to say.
You can bet the government will be trying to fast-track the signing, along with negotiations for PNG to open a centre. In the meantime, the debate intensifies about whether the government is on the right track or simply making policy on the run under pressure from the opposition.
If you elect the coalition, you'll stop the big new taxes and you'll stop the boats.
Stop the big new taxes and to stop the boats.
Stop the big new taxes and stop the boats.
The government is hopeful its latest move will stem the opposition's ongoing election mantra and certainly discourage the boats. Immigration officials say there are signs of this already. The Prime Minister is pushing this message to people smugglers and asylum seekers.
There's no point getting on a boat because your claim won't be processed. We will continue to work through with Malaysia, and it's also very clear to Australians we've been in discussions with PNG.
She has instead followed Tony Abbott down the dark path back to the days of the Howard government.
Well, certainly policy on the run, because we were negotiating with East Timor. We were negotiating to some extent with Indonesia, and suddenly this Malaysian rabbit pops out of the hat.
With our experience, or with the government's experience with East Timor, I'm a little bit apprehensive that it hasn't really thought through a lot of the detail, but it is an encouraging start. My strong view is that we're not likely to resolve asylum seeker, people smuggling, issues such as that without a regional solution. We can't do it on our own.
It's a view shared by this retired senior diplomat and former head of the Department of Immigration during the Howard era, who also makes this pointed observation about the government's much publicised failed attempts to set up offshore processing.
It's always best to have your discussions in private with your partners, reach an agreement, talk about how you're going to deal with it together, including publicly, and then go public. That's the way that works best in my experience.
With Thailand now putting up its hand as well to consider the Malaysian model, the government is being advised to negotiate carefully and in private to stitch up a regional strategy.
This is exactly the sort of thing that regional governments have been talking about for 10 years, using regional responses to what is a regional problem, that is people smuggling, which does affect lots of countries in the region.
I was Secretary of the Department of Immigration in the early 1980s when very large numbers of Indo-Chinese people were fleeing Vietnam, and the cooperation then of the countries, Malaysia, Thailand and Indonesia particularly, were essential.
It has to be about all countries buying into a process of how we can really deal with the needs of asylum seekers in the region, not just cutting side deals with countries simply so that Australia doesn't have to take on board our current obligations under the Refugee Convention.
And that's the real sticking point for refugee advocates and other seasoned observers who claim Australia is neglecting its international responsibilities through its offshore deal.
Yes, I think so. I think it's not based on any firm principles, except trying to avoid committing ourselves to boat people as permanent residents in Australia.
If it is just a means to fix the so-called boat people problem and swap refugees and people, I think that would be a disgrace. If, however, it's the beginning of a regional framework based on human rights, the International Convention on Refugees, it will be a major step forward.
Either way, this is a debate that's not about to leave the political arena anytime soon.